Let's start with AI Radar, the segment where we break down the biggest headlines and updates from the world's leading AI players. Think of it as your quick fire pulse check on what's hot in AI this week. What do you have for us?
This was a good transition because we had an interesting statement from Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, who is sounding the alarm that AI could wipe out half of all entry level white collar jobs in the US within just 5 years and push US unemployment as high as 20%. He said this is not just about tech. He did say, Amodei saying that AI will be writing 90% of software code within 6 months and nearly all code within a year. But he went beyond engineering. Roles in finance, law, and consulting are also in the AI crosshairs, especially for folks just starting out in their careers. His bluntest warning, and this is a quote, most workers are unaware this is about to happen, end quote. He's urging lawmakers and tech leaders to get ahead of the curve and proposing things like reskilling programs and even what he called a token tax on AI companies to help fund support for displaced workers. So I felt like our jobs were not in immediate danger, but Dario clearly thinks that some US jobs are.
Well, it is interesting and sort of a scary announcement that he made, but I think exactly this problem we've talked about on the pod before, which is basically like the more experienced workers probably are somewhat safe in terms of job security. But how does the entry level work get changed? And probably a lot of the entry level jobs that we're seeing today will go away, but what will they be replaced with? I think that there is a lot of work for them to be replaced with. We've talked about the need for like infrastructure upgrades and data cleaning and this type of stuff that is going to be especially important. And so, how do we do those training programs? But then there's sort of a second follow on question of like, once you do the training programs and you have people in seat in those roles, what if they wanted to transition to a legal career or an engineering career? Like, there's not necessarily like a clear pathway for that. So I think it's important for him to sort of like start the debate of how are we going to accomplish this. And I do think it is like a lot of people need to be involved in the discussion, but certainly maybe a dire forecast that he has.
Yeah, it feels a little bit the combination of the overly optimistic, how fast tech will be actually deployed and implemented and kind of diffused out into the environment, which has always been over every technological revolution. There's been this prediction of the massive unemployment. And not that this one maybe isn't a little bit different, but it feels like your starting assumption should be this will take longer to diffuse into the economy than you think. The scary thing to me is, the legal example is great. If you replace all your associates, your first year associates with AI, maybe you can do that. But then where do you get your second year associates and your junior partners and your partner? What's the pipeline? How do we get those people to work? So I don't know. I'm also heartened by we were talking about the study last week up at, I want to say it was the Mayo Clinic or somewhere where you thought radiologists were in real danger. And it turns out that like you could do certain parts of the radiologist's job really well, but not all the parts of the radiologist's job. And so it turns out that people aren't fully displaced because while you can do parts of the job, you still need people to do other parts of even the entry level jobs. And that's, gives you a little hope for those people. All right. So moving from employment to something a little nerdier, perhaps, a cybersecurity researcher used OpenAI's new O3 model to independently uncover a critical 0-day vulnerability in the Linux kernel. No external tools, just the model and code. By analyzing Linux's KSMBD, I hope I got that right, module for network file sharing, the model spotted complex memory flaw that could allow remote attackers to gain full system control. OpenAI's president called it a milestone moment, though the researcher cautioned the model isn't always reliable. But this does signal a shift in cybersecurity workflows. AI models are not just kind of co-pilots or helpers; they're becoming principal investigators. And for leaders, this really suggests AI may soon cut costs and accelerate audits and level the playing field between defenders and attackers. So this was a fascinating one to me. Went out and fully found this flaw just with OpenAI, kind of looking at the code base and being told, "Hey, look for this kind of flaw," and then it finds it.
I was excited about this one. So cool to see this because, I obviously, I have cybersecurity folks on my team. And every single person that I have ever interviewed for a cybersecurity role or looking to be a cybersecurity leader, it's an incredibly challenging area that you have to protect a company in because historically, you just need an army of bodies to protect the perimeter. And there's constantly, for companies, a cost benefit analysis of like how many bodies is the right number of bodies to defend and how do you know when you're properly defended and all this type of stuff. And historically, it's just a very expensive area, but also an area you can't afford to not spend in because, your data is your most important asset. And so having there be tools and things that can make those people more efficient and make them have, agents that are sort of running alongside of them, sort of protecting a company's data, I think is huge. So I personally, you called it nerdy. This was, I think, my favorite story of the week.
Interesting. I wouldn't have predicted this to be your favorite story, Annie. The fascinating thing to me too on this is it's not like this was some obscure internal code base. Like this is the Linux kernel. This is one of the most widely deployed pieces of open source software in the world. And so this, really showing that this code was not able to just find a flaw in a general set of code, but in a highly reviewed piece of software. So anybody thinking about how do I find security bugs or do analysis in my software, like you got to feel like there's lower hanging fruit in your world than there is in the Linux kernel world. And so pretty impressive to me that it was able to just kind of go out and do this in such a highly reviewed area.
100%.
We'll see if we can keep it as interesting for you as we move forward. Now I'm nervous if everything else is as interesting as that one,
We'll
Annie.
see. That was a high bar, Jeff. That was a high
High
bar.
bar.
Yeah.
Well, this one a little bit of a playing catch up this time. Anthropic just entered the voice assistant game. They're rolling out a new voice mode for the Claude mobile app, letting users talk naturally with Claude and not just type. This beta feature is launching in the coming weeks for English speaking users and runs on Claude's latest Sonnet 4 model. You'll be able to flow between speaking and typing mid conversation, choose from 5 different AI voices, and see real time transcriptions as you go. If you're on the paid plan, Claude can also respond to voice commands by pulling from your Google Calendar, Google Docs, even Gmail. Free users get about 20 or 30 voice messages a month, and paid subscribers get a little bit of a higher cap. I think a substantially higher cap, but a little bit of catch up here, getting up to where Gemini and OpenAI have been. But I feel like everybody loves voice mode.
For sure. And here's a nerdy question for you. I would love to see the data breakdown of use of voice mode versus chat sort of by generation, because I'm very curious, like, as we move into a more AI future, are the younger generations going to be much more voice interface type of driven versus a writing culture that we would see in some of the sort of older crowd? I'm putting myself in the older crowd, which is sort of a depressing leap, but I'm genuinely curious about the sort of breakdown by generations on preference of voice over chat. I don't know if you have a perspective on that.
I don't know if there it'd be interesting to see where that is. I find it to be more situational for me. I like both, but it
Mm.
depends on where I'm at, what I'm doing. When I'm in the car, I love voice mode. I can have a nice conversation. I actually really like the feature they've launched here where you can see and switch between voice and typing mid conversation because I find myself doing that. I've been using a piece of software on my laptop recently called Whisperflow that lets you speak into any text box. It's basically just on device transcription. And so anything you say, anywhere you're inputting a Google Doc, an email, whatever, you could just voice the text. And I've gotten really to like it. And so I think, but sometimes I've actually thought about having OpenAI during this podcast. And I don't want you to talk back to me. I just want you to listen and then tell me smart things I should be saying, like pop up relevant content, like listen and tell me when there's something useful that I'm missing. I haven't gotten that to work yet, but this kind of multimodal mode where you can talk to it and look at the answer or hear the answer or maybe type back something, I think is a really interesting element. But I think we'll increasingly, as this becomes available, see more people switching to it, at least in some contexts. But obviously, when you're out in public, sometimes it's a little awkward to be talking at your phone when everybody wants to be doing that and getting the answers.
Yeah, although arguably no more awkward than typing in your phone where you're just sort of socially isolating. It's just, you know, we'll see.
We'll see. And this will really point towards these capabilities in the different form factors, whatever it is, Johnny Ivan, Sam Altman, IO, and Love are going to do. Glasses that now rumored Apple, is put into high speed their glasses production. Google announcing the Android XR we talked about last week, but new glasses coming. Those are clearly going to be voice first modes. So I do think there'll be increasing focus on driving really high quality voice interactivity modes for all these models because there are certainly going to be devices where that is you don't type on your glasses. I don't think that's a world we're going to live in. So it's going to be something we need no matter what.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right. While we're on the topic of AI native things, and we go from voice to the browser, Opera, famous for their Opera browser, just dropped Neon, a new AI native browser designed to automate your life online. It features built-in agents that can search, summarize, shop, code, or even build websites for you, all via natural language. Neon embeds an AI assistant directly into the browser, handles routine tasks like hotel bookings, form fills, and supports creating apps or games with cloud-based agents that work independently. It's positioning itself as the first AI agentic browser with a premium subscription model and early access now open via waitlist. This was interesting to me because when you combine with Google, who's integrated Gemini more deeply into Chrome, you see some new features coming out. Perplexity, one of the kind of second level players in this space, is working on their own browser called Comic. And Arc developer, the browser company, it's my favorite browser right now, is kind of giving up on the Arc browser, or at least putting it on ice, and moving towards their new AI first browser called Dia. So really fascinating. Maybe this is the first front in the new browser wars driven by AI, which is not necessarily browser war 2.0, not the thing I saw coming from AI, but it seems like everybody wants a new AI driven browser.
Yeah, this was fascinating, and I think some of the functionality that they're previewing seems really cool and really useful, and I don't know, did you get a chance to watch the sort of, like, video advertisement?
I watched a little bit of it, but why don't you tell us about it?
Okay, the video advertisement was fascinating in my opinion because they really leaned into a very sort of like AI centric world in a way that I feel like others sort of are like leaning into human centric with AI assist. This was like a robot walking around talking about how great it is at things, and like the robot was walking a actual dog, and then there was also a human watching a robot dog on the same, so sort of this very like humans and robots working together sort of future that it was previewing. It sort of like made a specific reference to people being fearful of this, and said something along the lines of, don't think of us as these scary dystopian, think of us like R2D2, right? Like,
It's a
and it
great
was
reference.
yes, it was a great reference, and I thought, "Wow, they, like, really leaned into, this sort of partnership sort of dynamic between a AI and a human in a way that I feel like other companies have not." So, anyway, like, the functionality seems fascinating and very cool, but also their marketing technique was very fascinating and cool, and in my point of view, different from what I've seen from others.
It is interesting to see people, the newer companies that don't, or at least let's say the people with less to lose from the current world that aren't the big winners, the Googles are really leaning into this being the forefront of what they do. I mean, it's a way to differentiate. It's a thing that's different than maybe what the big players are doing, but it is interesting to watch them lean into that. And I love that. And this idea of your AI as your partner is really interesting. As I've started co-editing more of my writing with AI, I kind of go like, I described him like a person, like, yeah, I didn't edit, I didn't like, we co-edited, I worked with, like, I mean, it feel it's an interesting world, and that idea of a partner, kind of a character that you're interacting with and think of as like as a coworker is really fascinating, version of that.
It is. Even at the end of the commercial, it said something along the lines of like, "This commercial was or this video was made by humans with support by AI," or maybe the other way around. And it made me laugh because sometimes when I always try to be forthcoming with people when I tell them, like, "This document is mine assisted by AI," but at what point am I gonna be like, "This is AI assisted by me?" Right? Like, when do
What's
you
the
make that
difference?
shift? What's the
How do
difference?
yeah.
Yeah. It was kind of funny.
It's fascinating. Well, I'm gonna hop us to what was to me the most surprising story of the week that I didn't see coming. The United Arab Emirates is giving every citizen free access to Chat GPT Plus, making it the first country to subsidize OpenAI's premium $20 a month service at a national scale. This is kind of part of the broader partnership between the UAE and OpenAI. It also included their upcoming Stargate UAE, the massive 1 gigawatt data center they're building in Abu Dhabi. And while tech companies have promoted educational access to I don't think I've seen anything that's quite this large in scope or ambition before. Everyone in the UAE getting ChatGPT Plus. What do you think?
I think it's great. I mean, I think so many problems that we've talked about in the last handful of decades about the gap in terms of access to the internet. Imagine if at the very beginning of the internet, every single citizen had had access, right? How would that have sort of transpired differently than how things did transpire? And I think now we're close to the point where everybody's got access, which is great, but it's still not evenly distributed. So having a country be like, "You know what? Early technology, important technology, we want all of our citizens to have access to it, so we're gonna pay for it," seems pretty cool to me.
It was a really interesting angle on this that Jensen Huang, I think, was talking about, which is that some of these countries realize they don't have their ambitions for importance and scale in the world, kind of, they don't have the population to do it. And so when they think of being, what they do have a lot of energy. And when they think of AI as essentially a mechanism for turning energy into workers, AI workers that can augment their workforce, they think of this as a path to growth, right? Like, how do I go and expand my workforce without a population that has to double, triple, quintuple over time that may not be realistic. And so that was a really fascinating take on this kind of view in some of these countries where they're really leaning into AI is like, how do we augment the workforce in our country so that we can grow and scale in a faster way based on what we have a lot of energy as opposed to what we don't have as many of, which is people. And that was like a really interesting perspective on this that put some of their investment in data center and things like giving everyone access to ChatGPT Plus in context, I thought was really clarifying for me.
Yeah, and it is the global national sort of analog to the the rub you see between companies right now, right? Of like the small scrappy startup that has 50 people but lots of AI and can move really fast. What are they going to build relative to the big behemoths that have a whole bunch of people and it's much slower to adopt AI and new technologies and roll that type of stuff out? And this is maybe the much larger scale parallel. So that's an interesting take.
All right, well, I'm going to wrap up the AI radar section with this story. The New York Times just inked a multi year deal with Amazon to license its content for AI, marking a big shift in how news organizations are engaging with this new generative AI technology. So, Amazon now gets access to Times articles for Alexa and other voice based experiences, not for model training like OpenAI and Anthropic are doing. The two will also team up on new audio storytelling formats. The details of the finances were not disclosed, but the report says the deal is worth something like $10 million. dollars. And this comes just months after the Times sued OpenAI for unauthorized use of its content. So it's really interesting to see this. Media is not going against AI, but they're also saying your access won't be free. And interesting to see the difference between training and usage in stories or real-time news reporting. So I don't quite know what this means for us, but it's clear that model performance will increasingly depend on these high quality licensed data. So this kind of deal or something like it could be more like the norm moving forward. I thought this was really interesting, and I imagine you have some takes on this.
Well, I do. I mean, I think this is an interesting follow-up to see after the conversation we had last week about Google and how, companies are suing Google and being frustrated with Google about making Gemini search results part of Google search results. And this is maybe an early precedent of what we'll see in the future, again, with like the bigger companies paying for the content and then just a massive shift in the economics of the internet of like pay per click or per subscription or per this to, the companies that are providing the content, paying the content makers, and then users sort of interacting with it through an LLM is just sort of a massive shift. And it'll be interesting. So this is, like I said, an early precedent, and we'll see if other sort of deals are forthcoming with similar news providers.
This one made so much sense to me. And it's interesting because the world of Google with 10 blue links or whatever you want to think of it, it was very natural to go, so well, I'm not paying you to provide a link to your site. I'm sending you traffic. Right. That's what you get in New York Times. People search the news, I come up with your article and they go over to your site. And then you've got the little snippet world, like maybe I only want the headline. Is that it? But in a world of AI where you're really not sending people over to the Times story anymore, and you can't argue that you are, the idea of paying the sources providing the content that you're using, not just in training, but news is a great example where I don't want what was in training 2 months ago. I want the current thing on the headline of the New York Times or the Washington Post, or whatever today. That's a very natural place for the LLM provider that's the interface to pay the content producer in a way that's not advertising oriented. And that may be a healthier economic model for news producers, consumers, and the AI players over time. So I've never been very comfortable with the advertising underpinning of the internet. This might be the beginnings of a shift away from that being the way we monetize content production online.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think the advantage to consumers is maybe not talked about as much, but I think there's a huge advantage to consumers because I don't know about you, but, like, managing 25 different subscriptions for all of the different things you have is sort of a headache, and you're like, "How much value am I getting from this versus that?" And, like, all of that type of stuff, and so it would be great if the information was just available to us through whatever, like, one-stop shop type of, source we could provide, and then we didn't have to, again, manage, like, I got the Times, and I got the Journal, and I got the Wall Street, I just got all of these different things going on is complicated, and just it's not even just in news content, but just the subscription culture is, like, it's a little bit out of control.
It reminds me of cable TV. What's fascinating about the history of cable TV and the evolution is everybody hated the bundle because you were paying for all these channels that you didn't want. But it turned out that it was actually a really good deal for most people because people that didn't want the channels you wanted were paying for those too. And so everybody got a lot of content for a good price. And now if you disaggregate cable, by the time you pay for the stuff you want, you're paying as much as your old cable bill, but you have access to less stuff and you got to find it in different places. And news never had the equivalent of the cable bundle where you had all your you could get CNN and Fox and the New York Times and Washington Post in one place. But it'd be really fascinating if LLMs and chat became the interface that kind of aggregated news the way cable had aggregated all the content and video, the bundle. And you're watching in video the reaggregation of that content into the bundle again, because it turns out the economics are better for consumers and for producers in the end. That it's a win. There's this fascinating economics. And I love the idea that we could get a news bundle through an LLM and I could get out of all my individual subscriptions and have access to the best articles and whatever I need with economics that work for everyone. It would be really, really interesting to see that happen.
Totally agreed. I would love to see that happen.